Integration is not working. We're not at the start of a hypothetical mass migration experiment. We're in the middle of it. And it turns out that if you have to force people to get along at gunpoint, diversity is not our strength. Nevertheless, the British government does not want to admit this, and instead has published a social cohesion strategy. This is Keir Starmer's protecting what matters towards a more confident, cohesive, and resilient United Kingdom. Again, if immigration were a good thing, you wouldn't need a social cohesion strategy to force us all to get along. And so what we see in this strategy is not a willingness by the government to admit that mass migration has gone horribly wrong, has produced an island of strangers, as Starmer once said, and therefore the humility to revise and perhaps even reverse those policies. No, no, no. Instead, what we see is an attempt to turn our country into something like a nationwide Michaela School, something I've been warning about for a very long time, where the strict enforcement of liberal pluralism, tone policing of one another's negative opinions of various groups, and neutral behaviour in the public square is strictly enforced on both natives and immigrants alike to compartmentalise your ethnic and religious identities to being a purely cosmetic thing based on the belief that deep down we're all the same. And it's unpleasant, unwanted, and it also isn't going to work, and yet the state insist on it anyway, and it's very clear in sentences from the foreword provided by Keir Starmer. Quote, "By any fair standard, Britain can be proud about its approach to social cohesion. Okay, why do you need the strategy? Simple things we take for granted, like interfaith marriages or religious freedom, are in fact a departure from the historical or international norm. Well, interfaith marriages don't really occur all that much either. The ease with which people of different cultures and races live side by side in our diverse democracy is both envied and feared around the globe. I mean, it's mainly feared by people who live here, who fear the costs and crimes caused by that mass migration, but also that's just not true. Like, people live sequestered in ethnic ghettos and sectarian enclaves because people like to live around people that look and act like them. And so, no, we're not all living side by side. We're living in recreations of tribes and different countries around the world. I mean, there's literally Jewish and Muslim neighbourhoods rubbing up against each other in Manchester. There's the Gorton and Denton by-election we saw recently, where the Greens mobilised the Muslim vote in Gorton against the low-propensity white working class vote in neighbouring Denton. They're in the same constituency, they share nothing in common, and one now has political power at the expense of the other. And it's this febrile environment which necessitates the government to produce a managerial style you all have to get along social cohesion strategy. Again though, this is a failed endeavour, it's not going to work. As Starmer writes, this call to action recommits Britain to that quiet act of defiance against the forces of division and renews our approach to social cohesion. As ever, we draw deeply on our shared values, not just our core liberal principles such as tolerance, protection for minorities, the rule of law, or the freedom to live and let live, a purely legal identity to stop people fighting. Like, Starmer is Hobbes' Leviathan. He is just the state holding back, like Tobey Maguire trying to stop the train in Spider-Man 2, the war of all against all. And again, it's just not going to work because you have to buy into the underlying principles of those values in order to uphold them. And tribal groups with completely different metaphysics, different religions, different senses of individualism or collectivism, because of decades of cousin marriage, centuries of cousin marriage, they're just not going to uphold those values. It's a failed enterprise. Nor just the natural pluralism that has always characterised an island country containing our four distinct and proud nations. Okay, we haven't always been pluralistic. Like, we've had faction wars between different Christian denominations and the Anglos and the Celts. Like, you want to throw like Somali Salafist Muslims into that mix and expect it to all go well? Are you insane? We also draw on the distinctively British approach to integration that has always been grounded in the fairness of the two-way street, in rights and responsibilities, and we draw on our pragmatic, common-sense decency, which means that people who come here to contribute can become not just citizens, but our friends and neighbours. That, bound by our common good, they become part of the greater us. So what you can see here is much like David Lammy wrote in 2024, after the aftermath of the Southport riots, is the insistence that it's not just imported minorities who need to adopt liberal values who need to integrate. It's also the indigenous population who've had these people inflicted upon them without their desire, against their express wishes at every election, who also need to assimilate into their own country that has been legally and culturally and demographically revolutionised by Blair, Cameron, May, Johnson, Sunak, and now Starmer. We need to assimilate into our own country because they have turned our country into an economic zone with a purely plastic legal civic identity, and conflated being British with liking democracy, obeying the law, paying the exorbitant rates of tax that they increasingly inflict upon us. And I'm sorry, I just don't consent to this. But not consenting to this makes you an extremist. It makes you the one causing division. It makes you the problem to be targeted, as we will see, by increasing surveillance and censorship measures that the government is bringing in to enforce social cohesion. Basically, anyone who notices there are problems caused by mass migration and mixing cultures is causing the problems, and if we censor them, they'll all go away. Starmer then says, we should rightly be proud of having some of the toughest anti-hate and anti-discrimination laws anywhere in the world. Again, statement of intent to censor you. But this should be underpinned by a collective responsibility to pursue integration. Again, to compartmentalise your convictions, your identity, under the umbrella of neutral liberal pluralism. To put it simply, Starmer says, if we are to be strong on the global stage, we must have strong and united communities at home, and so, to weather the storms of this volatile world, it follows that our social contract must now also be strengthened. We've never been a social contract society. We are an old world country. We are a country based on peoples, on ethnic groups, on families of families. And we are an organic country. Our common law has accumulated over time to become a mix of the Christian morals and the prejudices and preferences of the English to negotiate our disputes between one another. We are not a juridical, legalistic morality like Judaism or Islam, and we're also not a social contract country like continental Europe. So this is completely alien to our political traditions, and this is the enforcement of an ideology top-down on a society that doesn't want it. And so it won't work. And what Starmer is recognising here is something that the Trump administration pointed out in their national security strategy, that if you demographically gerrymander a country in NATO, you end up making it so that America has to spend its blood and treasure defending us, but we are no longer us. We're just like a bus station for any Somali or Pakistani that rocks up wanting a handout. And instead of going, yeah, we should stop importing those people and start deporting them, Starmer's gone, well, what if we all force them to be exactly identical at gunpoint instead? Again, founded on fundamentally false premises that mean that our country will turn into a tyranny to make multiculturalism work. And you're going to get whiplash if you read this report, because the executive summary admits that this isn't going well, despite Keir Starmer glossing diversity as being our strength, because it says, the United Kingdom has endured rapid technological, demographic and economic change alongside a rising tide of extremism and malign foreign influence. The language gives the game away. You don't endure something that's good for you. Diversity cannot be our strength if we have endured the demographic change that is euphemized as diversity. Like, you don't endure eating ice cream or winning the lottery. You enjoy it. And so if we haven't enjoyed rapid demographic change, then it is a punishment inflicted upon our population. Chapter 1, the introduction, makes the same admission. Over the last decade, we've seen emerging signs that cohesion is fraying. So the government will take a leading role to heal divides and protect what matters. Okay, but the government caused this problem by bringing the people here causing the disruption in the first place. The government, if they brought them here, can send them back. And that is what the majority of the population desire. But your refusal to do so is what's causing the social division. And so instead, you're going to blame the people who don't want this done to them, censor and silence them, and turn them into second-class citizens in their own country to try to keep your precarious, progressive revolution on rails, even though it's careening towards a cliff edge. But of course, it wouldn't be a progressive revolution without cognitive dissonance, because under Chapter 3 it says, for centuries, people have come to this country to build a better life, contributing economically and culturally to our society, and helping to rebuild it after major shocks such as the Second World War. We should recognise the benefits and remarkable success story of the modern, multi-ethnic, multi-faith United Kingdom. To continue this success, we must be clear that we are a society built on shared values. Okay, we aren't. You also can't have shared values between religious groups. Like, this is one of the things that progressives never get asked. It's a circle they've never managed to square. Ethnicity and race are immutable characteristics, even though they pretend that you can be just as English as anyone else by declaring yourself English. But religion is an option. Religion is a set of ideas. You might be born into it, but you can leave it, unless you're in a Muslim country and you'll get your head cut off for doing so. So, if your ideas are immutable characteristics, why is being far right not an immutable characteristic? It's the only thing outside the bounds of acceptable discourse to them. Why is religion treated as distinct from values? Why is it treated as a protected characteristic rather than the progenitor of culture and values? Because values and religion are dependent on one another. Religion provides the metaphysical foundations for why you believe what you believe. Values are beliefs, so you can't separate out religion and values. And so to have religions be protected characteristics means that the law will protect, as indistinct and equal from one another, the competing and incompatible foundations for values. And it means the law is based on a set of values that the law cannot actually sustain because it is protecting religions that disagree with those values. I understand the blank slate is baked into the suppositions that these authors have, but have they just never been forced to sit there and think about this? Or do they just live with cognitive dissonance at this level? Because if they do, how do you even get dressed in the morning? Also, it's just not true that immigrants came to Britain to help us rebuild after the Second World War. The Windrush were not wanted, they were not invited, it was considered a national crisis at the time, and yet again, the rate of immigrants working in the NHS has stayed roughly in line with the immigrant population of the country, thereby the people using the NHS. Funnily enough, England's world-class health service, compared to other countries at the time, especially the countries that we're supposed to be sourcing all these doctors and nurses from, functioned without immigration. And also, it's just not the case that people came here for centuries to build a better life. Are you saying the Viking invaders and the Norman conquest was just about coming to Britain to build a better life? Even so, they left less than a 10% genetic imprint over 1,000 years later. 90% of Britons in 1927 could trace their ancestry back to 927, when Athelstan defeated the last Viking settlement. The Norman conquest left at most a 5%, but more likely a 1% genetic imprint on Britain. Until 1945, we had less migration between 1066 and then than we have since 1997. So sorry, the idea that we've always been a diverse, multi-ethnic, multi-faith democracy is untrue. It's just liberal myth-making, and I'm tired of hearing it. And one of the most egregious pillars of this myth that we have always been a successful, multi-ethnic, multi-faith democracy is just a couple of paragraphs later, when they point out that integration has not been working for quite some time by citing Baroness Louise Casey's 2016 review that showed there is evidence of some communities refusing to integrate and failing to embrace our shared values that make the UK great. Okay, they don't share your values, that's why, but also this is particularly egregious because this is not the 2014 Rotherham review that Louise Casey did, but in that review, in the 2016 report, that review is referenced. So what they're conceding here is their definition of evidence that some communities refuse to integrate is the Pakistani rape gangs. Could you understate that ethnic and religious war crime against the native population any more than just, some evidence that some communities are refusing to integrate? Especially when in the next paragraph it says, hate crime statistics only scratch the surface. Behind them lies a quieter erosion of trust. People of Roma heritage who face prejudice. Remember the Hare Hills riots? The Hindu family whose local temple has been vandalised. The Muslim woman who avoids certain areas when walking alone. Or the Jewish family who are less open about their identity. The result is a climate in which prejudice can harden, grievances can fester, and extreme voices find a receptive audience. No mention of the hundreds of thousands of white English girls that have been pimped, drugged, raped, trafficked, tortured, in some cases murdered, by Pakistani and other Muslim men. No mention of that. Do you not think that is a greater barrier to social cohesion and integration? I think that you do, and the reason that it wasn't reported on for a very long time was because you knew that if the public knew the truth, it would result in riots. That is why police officers consistently, again, they told Casey this, said, we don't want to publish the ethnicity of the perpetrators and the victims, the disparity between their identities, and the racial nature of the predation, because it would inflame community tensions. So you know this is going on. You know that the rape gangs is the most egregious example of immigration and integration failing, and even still you don't reference it because you want to pretend that things are better than they are, even when you're publishing a report justifying the government censoring everyone to force people to get along. Instead of telling the truth, they just make declarative ideological statements, which are so tiresome. For example, the UK is a diverse, pluralistic, and equal society. We respect and value people of all races, religions, sexualities, and genders. But respect for religion or culture does not require us to tolerate behaviour which attacks or undermines our fundamental values as a society. Gender equality, LGBTQ+ rights, and freedom from discrimination are fundamental to who we are. Henry VIII must have missed his trans inclusion seminar. Integration means understanding and embracing these values. Attempts to impose extremist views, restrict the rights of others, or pressure people to conform to an intolerant worldview are not acceptable, and religious pluralism should not come at the expense of another person's freedoms or right to exist safely. We will not tolerate efforts of individuals to sow division, stir anger against those with religious, political, or social views different to theirs, or spread extremist, intolerant beliefs that undermine our shared values. So, this is a statement of intent saying, unless you subscribe to gay woke liberalism, shit liberty, we will censor you and we will treat you as the enemy of the state. Much like Karl Popper's paradox of tolerance, the only intolerable position to the British state is intolerance of anything they are willing to tolerate. So that means if you don't agree that trans women are women, if you don't agree that Shabana Mahmood can self-identify as English, if you don't agree that we can be a country in which Jews, Muslims, Christians, Hindus, and Sikhs all coexist, which has never happened anywhere ever. The Sikhs literally exist because Hindus and Muslims kept fighting on the Indian subcontinent. If you don't agree with all of these insane, delusional propositions, you are an enemy of the state. And so this document lays out the punishments that they're going to inflict on we, the enemies of the state, for the crime of noticing that social divisions are the product of immigration, not the product of noticing social divisions. For example, the government is going to invest in initiatives that create opportunities for connection across backgrounds, including cultural and sporting events, youth and community infrastructure, and all sorts of other minoritarian grievance projects that are funded by our tax money. They're going to teach our values and history. They're going to mandate citizenship classes in schools and teach digital literacy to help young people navigate the modern world. As was pointed out in a Spectator piece, this means that homeschooling is basically going to be banned, by the way. They're going to celebrate faith and belief communities. Working closely with faith and belief communities, we will expand Interfaith Week, boost faith and belief literacy in government and wider society, and deliver £92 million of our money to the Places of Worship Renewal Fund to protect religious heritage buildings and support community cohesion. They are going to insist that every religion, despite their hatred for one another, is equal, is compatible, and identical. And they are going to spend infinite amounts of money and silence anyone that says otherwise. They're going to work with schools to tackle racist abuse and understand disparities in exclusions, alongside research into improving the recruitment and progression of teachers from ethnic minority groups. Translation, they're going to crack down on white kids who complain that they're now minorities in their own classrooms and are being mistreated by their less individualistic peers. They're going to invent all sorts of reasons why black kids are excluded at higher rates than white kids. They're going to blame it on them not having access to ping pong tables and youth clubs, I'm sure. And they're going to continue to enforce diversity, equity, and inclusion quotas on teaching positions. They're also going to strengthen charity commission powers to defund charities that are accused of propagating extremist abuse. The likelihood that this actually cracks down on charities like the Muslim Council of Britain or Islamic Relief or Hope Not Hate, very unlikely. In fact, it's probably going to go to funding them more through circuitous means. One example being funding for the British Muslim Trust to provide a helpline to report incidents safely and access support. Right, so it's going to be a Islamophobia hotline that requires no evidence, that is then going to create inflated statistics that then manufactures consent for the government to censor criticism of Islam even more. And they're going to inflict even more DEI on the public sector by saying they're going to include diverse perspectives in public service reform. They're going to charge the Race Equality Unit, an explicitly race communist outfit, to undertake a program of engagement with a diverse range of communities. It's not going to be any British people, is it? Across the country to further understand the important connection between public service delivery, inequality, and social cohesion. Essentially, we are going to insist that the blank slate is real in spite of all evidence, and so we are going to continue to procedurally discriminate against white people in favour of non-white people, taking your tax money and giving it to grievance industries, because we believe that if we just keep oppressing you in your own country, everyone will be equal, hold hands, and live in John Lennon's Imagine eventually. I'm sure this won't empower the most vindictive anti-white racists at all. They're also going to increase the support and funding the government, us, provide to programs that directly tackle anti-Muslim hate, including the Combating Hate Against Muslims Fund. We're committing £4 million of our money to tackle anti-Muslim hostility and implement the definition of anti-Muslim hostility, which is, as defined here, intentionally engaging in, assisting, or encouraging criminal acts, including acts of violence, vandalism, harassment, or intimidation, whether physical, verbal, written, or electronically communicated, that are directed at Muslims because of their religion, or at those who are perceived to be Muslim, including where that perception is based on assumptions about ethnicity, race, or appearance. It is the prejudicial stereotyping of Muslims, or people perceived to be Muslim, including because of their ethnic or racial backgrounds or their appearance, and treating them as a collective group defined by fixed and negative characteristics, with the intention of encouraging hatred against them, irrespective of their actual opinions, beliefs, or actions as individuals, or engaging in unlawful discrimination where the relevant conduct, including the creation or use of practices and biases within institutions, is intended to disadvantage Muslims in public and economic life. Okay, if you don't promote Muslim candidates in your political party or in your business, you are guilty of anti-Muslim hostility. If you have a negative opinion of Islam, you're guilty of anti-Muslim hostility, even if based on scripture and their own behaviour. If you have a negative opinion of any immigrant that is from a region where Muslims also live, even if they're not Muslim, you're guilty of anti-Muslim hostility. All this is meant to do is put a chilling effect, a cordon sanitaire around any conversation about Islam and its compatibility with our country, as well as immigration more broadly. And so the government is funding a Islamophobia inquisitor, not only in government, but various satellite organisations that exist to silence the native population's opinion of sectarian communities that have been brought into our country against our will, and who do not share the underlying values that this very document lays forth as being quintessential to British identity. So, the purpose of the system is what it does. The purpose of this document is not to improve integration or community relations. It's to silence conversations about Islamic terror, mass migration, multiculturalism, and the very Pakistani rape gangs that the government is meant to be supervising a statutory inquiry into, but has precluded from its terms of reference race and religion. You know, the very motive of the gangs in the first place. And even though the definition is non-statutory, it's going to inform statutory guidance on how to prosecute hate crimes. As it says here, we will ensure hate crimes are prosecuted with the full force of the law. We will provide further protective security funding for faith communities, so more money to mosques. Also take forward a series of actions to tackle religious hatred. And we are adopting a non-statutory definition of anti-Muslim hostility and will appoint a special representative on tackling anti-Muslim hostility. So the definition will be the pretext to ramp up efforts to prosecute people for hate crimes, not physical violence, but as that definition already put forward, public or online speech that negatively characterizes Muslims or Islam, regardless of the substance of those characterizations. So I could, for my opposition to Islam, very well be done for a hate crime in the next couple of years. And they're going to give the civil service training on religious hatred. So baking in more pro-Muslim bias into the civil service, who already run a don't look back in anger department out of the Home Office to gaslight the public anytime a jihadist blows up a kid's pop concert. They say that they're going to use the full force of the law to continue censoring you, by the way. Quote, recognizing that Jewish, Muslim and other minority communities are facing rising levels of hatred and extremism, we will work with the Crown Prosecution Service and the police to ensure robust use of existing hate crime and public order legislation on harmful extremist conduct and terrorism legislation wherever conduct meets the appropriate threshold. So, if you say something that offends a Jewish person or a Muslim, then you could be prosecuted for a hate speech code violation in the UK, and they're promising to do more of this. This is their strategy to ensure community cohesion, is to censor anyone pointing out that it isn't working. And they're going to do this via the Online Safety Act. They say, using the Online Safety Act, we will give people greater control over what they're exposed to online and reduce accidental exposure to hateful content. That means they're going to intimidate social media companies to manipulate their algorithms to censor content that the UK government determines is extremist on their behalf, which means that online platforms like X are going to have to start enforcing hate speech laws again if they want to operate in the UK. Greater control is Orwellian doublespeak for we are going to use the law to demand social media platforms manipulate their algorithms to censor people who we blame for causing problems of social cohesion, who are just pointing out the problems that manifest organically from mass migration. Under the Online Safety Act, Ofcom can require companies to share information with them regarding their algorithms to ensure they operate them safely. Safely means algorithms will deprioritize, censor, and suppress content that the government doesn't like. And they're going to have an annual review of the impacts of misinformation using the chief scientific advisor, which I think is now Dr. Patrick Vallance, who was responsible for spreading all sorts of misinformation during the COVID era. They have commissioned an evidence review on misinformation, focusing on how to measure the problem, assess harms, and counter and mitigate these harms, which will be published in 2026. We'll go through that on this channel, but going through it might get me banned as spreading misinformation because the government does not want to admit the problems it has caused. I mean, for example, just look at the extents they went to cover up Axel Rudikabana's family background, his ethnicity, his identity, whether or not he was a Christian or allegedly attends mosque while in Belmarsh prison. Look at the extents they went to lie to the public repeatedly. And so misinformation just means people telling the truth about what the government is up to. And one of the nefarious things the government will be doing is expanding the remit that government agencies, the intelligence sector, the Home Office, the police can operate under to conduct acts of sabotage, manipulation, and even law-breaking already afforded to them by the Covert Human Intelligence Sources Criminal Conduct Act 2021 passed by Boris Johnson's government that allows pretty much any government department to break the law if it's pursuant to the national economic interests. And remember, they think diversity is our strength, so the national interest is continuing mass migration. They promise under this new community cohesion strategy to develop new tools and powers to disrupt organizations that spread extremism, hate, and threaten public safety, introducing a state threats designation power based on counter-terrorism prescription, disrupting and deterring the most egregious state and proxy organizations carrying out hostile activity against the UK. Remember, the people they have in mind are the characters in the Amelia game when they're writing this. They envision teenagers sharing my content, or watching The Lotus Eaters, or liking posts by Steve Laws. They envision those people as terrorists, meanwhile turning a complete blind eye to the jihadists they've imported into our midst that are shooting up synagogues or killing people in London Bridge. And this is explicit, by the way, because they're now adopting the 2024 extremism definition invented by Michael Gove and Raiku and Hope Not Hate affiliate Dame Sarah Khan, whose sister ran Raiku, who is responsible for producing the Woman in the Union Jack hijab psyop image that was used after Alan Henning was beheaded by ISIS in 2014 on the front cover of the Sun newspaper to represent the true face of moderate British Islam. The definition is as follows. Extremism is the promotion or advancement of an ideology based on violence, hatred, or intolerance that aims to A. negate or destroy the fundamental rights or freedoms of others, B. undermine, overturn, or replace the UK's system of liberal parliamentary democracy and democratic right, or C. intentionally create a permissive environment for others to achieve the former. So, anyone who is engaged in not actively disavowing those who point out problems with liberal tolerance and mass democracy is an extremist. And these extremists will be censored and suppressed using the Online Safety Act by social media companies, subjected to more punitive prosecutions by the Crown Prosecution Service under hate crime statutes, and are considered basically terrorists by the government because they're complaining about the actual terrorists they brought into the country. They're also going to spend more of our money on international gay race communism, by the way. They're going to work with the United Nations, the Council of Europe, and the Organisation for Security and Cooperation in Europe to use their diplomatic network to press for laws and policies that protect religious or belief minorities and promote inclusive, tolerant societies. So, any organisation that says they want to, for example, reduce Muslim migration into Europe will be considered by the British government and by international bodies pressured by the British government as terrorist organisations. So the AFD is going to be considered a terrorist organisation by the UK government. National Rally, the Freedom Party in Austria. All of our European brethren that just want to fix their own countries are going to be considered terrorists by Keir Starmer's punitive, delusional liberal pluralist regime. Oh, and if you complain about the following, you're also a terrorist. They're going to encourage integration based on values, include ending the use of asylum hotels and returning them to local communities. They are going to disperse illegal migrants across your neighbourhoods, near your children's schools. They are going to do so through the sponsorship of the various NGOs they are funneling money to. They are going to ensure that your family is put at risk, and if you dare to take to the internet to complain about this, you're going to be censored by the Online Safety Act, you're going to be prosecuted under a hate crime statute, and you're going to be treated like a terrorist by the UN. And they genuinely believe that this division, disruption, the reason that diversity is not a strength, is a consequence of you pointing out the problem. As they write here, unrest in Leicester in 2022, when Hindu Indians and Pakistani Muslims rioted for a month over the outcome of a cricket match. I've been told cricket is a British value. How weird they aren't integrating. Was partly linked to the import of nationalist rhetoric and religious extremism, creating tensions between the city's Hindu and Muslim communities. The extreme right, though fragmented across various ideologies, is becoming increasingly interconnected globally, including via social media and other channels. Right, so because Hindus and Muslims play out their ethnic and religious grudges in Britain's cities, the extreme right who point it out are therefore the bigger threat, even though they're not burning down Leicester over a cricket match. They believe that Hindus and Muslims, Indians and Pakistanis, would not be fighting in our streets if not for right-wingers on Twitter. And apparently, it's all my fault. That and Carl Benjamin and Charlie Downs, because they say those in positions of power and responsibility have a role in promoting a confident modern patriotism, not least because the failure to do so in recent years has created space for the extreme right to equate being English with being white or being Christian, exploit national identity as an ethnic construct tied to race or religion, something the vast majority of people reject. So, if you say that being English is not a product of a passport, or of values, or of self-identification, like a man putting on a dress and calling himself a woman, if you say being English is a product of heritage, and that being Christian is inextricable from shaping British identity, law, institutions, and culture, you are an extremist far-right terrorist according to the UK government. And I can't help but notice that this has been published after Charlie Downs' interview on Talk TV with Alex Phillips, where he set out this definition. After the launch of Restore Britain, while they are currently applying to the Electoral Commission, and we've already seen efforts from some people in Reform UK trying to launch complaints to the Commission to stop it from being registered as a political party. I wouldn't be shocked if this is cited as a reason, if it encounters any problems with the Electoral Commission, as to why it can't be registered. Because remember, this report, a leaked draft version to The Spectator, this report contained reference to Operation Raise the Colours and said that people had been using the St George's Cross and the Union Jack as a hate symbol to intimidate minorities. That's been removed over the last few days. So this report has still been written. It's been in its draft stages right up until the publication deadline. So I wouldn't be shocked if the launch of Restore Britain, and what some of its media surrogates and supporters have been saying on TV and online, has informed this draft. They're coming for us. They will censor us. If this channel gets banned and demonetized in the next few months or year, you know why. Also, something comedic but also dark to point out, they promise to strengthen the national curriculum and qualifications in England to ensure high-quality teaching of our nation's history. They've misspelled England. They also say, we're going to continue to include the Holocaust as a compulsory topic within Key Stage 3, as confirmed by the government last year. I am sure this will not backfire spectacularly if you keep beating young men over the head with World War II and the persecution of Jews as the excuse for why they can't have a country for themselves anymore. I'm sure this will not lead at all to a rise in anti-Semitism or flippancy about the atrocities of the 20th century. I'm sure that hasn't already happened in America. Speaking of America, this report also encourages local councils to adopt the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's working definition of anti-Semitism. And it says most councils have already done that. To remind you of what that definition is, it was a definition that Congress voted against a motion adopting in 2024 because they were worried that the definition would proscribe Bible verses. The definition is, anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred towards Jews. Rhetorical and physical manifestations of anti-Semitism are directed towards Jewish or non-Jewish individuals and or their property, towards Jewish community institutions and religious facilities. Yet again, it is the policing of negative opinions about groups. The only group you're allowed to have a negative opinion about, by the way, is of course the indigenous white population of Britain, the English, Welsh, Scottish and Irish, and you're allowed to go so far as to deny that they even exist as distinct categories, and anyone who insists that they do exist as distinct categories is considered a terrorist by the British government. So you're allowed to have negative opinions of that group only, and that group is compelled by law to have positive opinions of any other religious or ethnic group imported into their country, otherwise they're terrorists. And the problem with this definition, much like the Islamophobia or anti-Muslim hatred one, is it conflates acts of violence, or in this case, Holocaust denial, with things such as accusing Jewish citizens of being more loyal to Israel or to the alleged priorities of Jews worldwide than to the interests of their own nations. The problem is, this would mean that British Jew, Melanie Phillips, is herself an anti-Semite because she said that British Jews should remember they are Jews first and foremost, over and above their national identities. So, according to the definition of anti-Semitism adopted by the British government, this prominent Jewish writer is an anti-Semite.
You need to know and love your identity. Israel gets it. Now diaspora Jews need also to realize you are not just Americans with Judaism added on. In Britain, they're not just British Jews with Judaism added on. They are part of the British people, you are part of the Jewish people and the Jewish nation, and that should come first. First and foremost, you are Jews. Everything else is secondary.
So it's therefore pretty absurd to say that it would be anti-Semitic and considered akin to terrorism by the British government if people were to question whether or not Jews had loyalty to Israel equivalent to or even superior to the nations they currently reside in. It's not a conversation that I find myself having quite frequently, but it also shouldn't be a conversation that is considered far-right extremism and a barrier to integration. Bearing in mind, the Conservatives are no better. I mean, here's Dan Hannan, the Conservative peer who championed Brexit for building Singapore-on-Thames, which he must have misread as Bangalore-on-Thames, because he's hosting the Conservative Muslim Forum that founds a party for all. He says Islam is the only global religion founded by a businessman, he was a caravan robber and a warlord, has always emphasised respect for property rights, unless they belong to non-Muslims, and secure contract and trade. That's why leftist parties encourage Muslims to vote, not as Muslims, but as ethnic minorities, as downtrodden victims of the patriarchy. Are you insane? And it's this Conservative Party that has made Kemi Badenoch leader, and Kemi Badenoch has also given a speech on integration after the sectarian voting on display at the Gorton and Denton by-election. This speech was delivered at Policy Exchange, yet another outfit funded by Paul Marshall, founded by Michael Gove and Francis Maude. Francis Maude was one of the modernisers of Cameron's Conservative Party, that delivered us this fractured ethnic and cultural settlement, and is now one of Kemi Badenoch's chief advisors. So, sorry, but you can't trust the Vandals to fix the house. A lot of this were just platitudes delivered to terminally SW1 Westminster bubble boomers who have a white guilt complex and want to be told that integration is happening and immigration is going well by a minority. It sort of soothes their ailing consciences. And so some truths are let slip here. For example, Kemi acknowledges that sectarianism is not just a problem with Muslim communities, but it's also happening with Hindus and Sikhs, considering a number of conservative politicians signed up to Sikh and Hindu manifestos at the last election. And she says, a lot of diaspora politics in Britain is just imported conflict, and when overseas grievances are imported, they produce separatist activism here. Remarking on Muslims and progressives targeting Jews in Brighton, she says, no other party seems to care about this except the Conservatives. We care because we believe in a united country, a Britain that feels recognisable wherever you are, not just a collection of tribes. I have long argued that while Britain is a multiracial country, we cannot be a multicultural one. Some people think this is a controversial position because they do not understand what culture is. Culture is not your skin colour, it is not just the food you eat or the clothes you wear for a festival. Culture is much deeper than that. It is behaviours, it is norms, it is expectations. Expectations about the role of women, about children and the freedoms they are allowed as they grow. It is attitudes to authority, who gets which jobs and how, concepts of fairness, notions of tolerance, free speech and definitions of what is sacred. That's what culture is. We must tackle this ludicrous idea that culture means something that comes from anywhere else. Okay, but you're still separating religion, the generator of values and culture, from values and culture. You're still separating culture, like a product, from the people that generate it and to whom it is second nature. And so you still have the false conception that you can transplant a culture and put it from one people onto another and make those peoples indistinguishable. That one people will be just as amenable to an imported or imposed culture as their own. It's not going to happen. And also, even this recognition that multiculturalism has failed was one, an admission made by David Cameron in 2015, and he continued along the path of multiculturalism anyway, but it's also like 20 years out of date. Like, well done, Kemi, you're as late to this realization as you are to everything else. You cannot give a different people a culture that does not have their prefix. British culture is the property of and the invention of the British people. Otherwise you wouldn't put British before it. And so there is no binding over culture, this umbrella of liberal pluralism, under which people of different cultures, different values, different religions can live peacefully side by side. It has never happened, it will not happen, integration has not worked, and insisting on a more muscular form of it is a doomed enterprise. Either you assert our culture unapologetically and exclusively, and those who don't like it leave of their own accord or are made to leave, or we lose the country. But we know that Kemi isn't willing to do this because yet again she places the locus of political representation and moral concern not in the native host majority, the indigenous people of Britain, the English, Scottish, Welsh and Irish. Instead, she focuses on minoritarian concerns. So Labour are speaking to the minorities that are persecuted by this hypothetical far right. Kemi is focused on the minorities within minorities that are persecuted in minority communities. She says the biggest victims are the people trapped inside separatism. Children growing up in England but fenced off from the full life of the country. Women blocked from work, from independence and from building a life of their own. Girls treated as adults far too young with rules of modesty imposed on their clothing, even in their school uniforms. Okay, first of all, your friend Catherine Belbelsing supported the appointment of a doctrinaire Muslim as the head of Ofsted, who ran one of these strict Muslim schools that enforce these dress codes. So, integration problem within your own ally camp there, Kemi. But also, no, actually, the minorities are not victims of other minorities, and those are not more victims than the host majority who never wanted these minority communities enforced on them in the first place, and are now being told by Labour and the Conservatives, the state and the opposition alike, that they must reintegrate into their own country at the same pace as the imported clannish minority communities. Kemi said, this is the reality that Labour, the Green Party and others who pander to separatism pretend not to see. They call it community, I call it coercion. Okay, I also call it coercion when you insist that the people brought here against our wishes have to stay here and that we have to reconfigure our culture and our identity to accommodate them. They shouldn't be here. They shouldn't be ruining our country. They shouldn't be disrupting our cultural cohesion. They shouldn't be rendering our home unfamiliar. She mentions this speech was prompted by the sectarian voting patterns in Gorton and Denton, with Muslims from Pakistan and Bangladesh electing the Greens. And she says much of the commentary in the days since has fixated on the issue of family voting. And she makes a good point. She says, our voting laws must be upheld, but I do not believe that all those women marched into polling booths to support Hannah Spencer because that was not what they wanted to do. I'm afraid they didn't want to vote Conservative or Reform either, just as they have not for 80 years. By fixating on family voting, we risk learning the wrong lesson from what happened by this by-election. Just as we did in Batley and Spen in 2021, when the Batley Grammar School teacher was sent into hiding because he dared to show a cartoon of their Prophet Muhammad in a lesson about religious tolerance and blasphemy. She says something else is happening, something much deeper and much more disturbing. What those by-elections had in common was campaigning designed to mobilise voters on ethnicity and religion, not domestic priorities. Totally true, Kemi. Absolutely the case. Why did your government bring those people into the country and allow them to vote in the first place? And why was your government also pandering to other sectarian, ethnic and religious groups from the Indian subcontinent in order to take power? This is something that Priti Patel, reminder, the former Home Secretary, that caused the Boris wave, who is now the shadow Foreign Secretary in Kemi's cabinet and has refused to apologise for the Boris wave and not lost her job. This is something that Priti Patel was skewered for on LBC by shitlib Lewis Goodall, who pointed out, you're complaining about Muslim sectarian voting in Gorton and Denton, but you were campaigning using like Bollywood music to Indians for Boris Johnson.
Obviously, if there's been any interference with the electoral process, completely illegal, wrong, needs to be looked at and stamped out.
To look at it, it's looking at one particular community and how they voted in that by-election.
But there's a difference between that, isn't there, and Muslim voters deciding reasonably en masse that there are certain parties that represent their interests, and they come to that view as individuals. Ethnic minority communities have always done that throughout democratic history. Why is it a problem when Muslims do it?
Primarily in this particular case, because it's specific to this particular by-election, I think we should just recognise that.
Kemi Badenoch was talking about something that happened more historically than that. She's talking about Labour created the monster of the Muslim community.
Because of course they have recently clearly been playing the Muslim community in terms of securing their own electoral base.
You mean targeting the Muslim community?
Their politics when it comes, look at the politics in their own party.
But your party has, for example, targeted British Indian voters in recent elections. Why is that any different?
No, that's a choice for them in terms of how they vote. We're not telling them how to vote.
But that's a choice for Muslims, how they vote.
I think in this by-election it was very particular, and I think now that there are going to be potential investigations by the Electoral Commission.
This is a video.
Boris Johnson, written KPM banenge. Boris Johnson.
Is that sectarian?
That is part of an election campaign, a national election campaign that all political parties do.
And that's what the Green Party were doing, targeting Muslim voters.
You could have shown the one for the Labour Party that they probably ran in that election and other political parties as well.
I'm not saying it's improper, but your leader is saying there's something improper about targeting particular communities.
I think we should absolutely say in this instance, this could potentially be looked at by the Electoral Commission in terms of voting patterns within the Muslim community. That is something not to be dismissed or taken lightly.
It's just mental that Priti Patel, of all people, is on the radio talking about this. She has described Indian voters as living bridges, which is Modi's term for Indian diasporas that India leverages as demographic pressure in foreign democracies to advantage India in geopolitics. This is why they can stipulate that every trade deal must contain additional provisions for more visas for Indian workers. And Priti Patel, of course, an Indian, a Hindu, is more than happy to play ball with that. That's why we saw 250,000 Indians coming in every year when she was Home Secretary. And according to the rules she set and bequeathed onto her successors, like James Cleverly. So the idea that this is just a Muslim problem is false. And she knows that, which is why she was talking around the issue, and she's never been honest a day in her life. Why, Kemi, do you think you have authority on this issue when she still sat in your shadow cabinet and Priti Patel, Boris Johnson, and you, Kemi, were part of the government that brought all these people here in the first place? Labour and Greens pander to Muslims, Conservatives pander to Sikhs and Hindus, Reform pander to Sikhs, Jews, and Muslims. You're all playing the same game, and the only off-ramp is to speak to the dispossessed, indigenous British majority as a voting bloc to represent their interests first and foremost. Though doing so will probably get you called a racist, a terrorist, and a far-right extremist sowing division by the British government, and any attempts to do so will probably get you banned from the internet. Kemi's solution instead is to make us all live in the Michaela School. I'm not exaggerating. She says, once upon a time we talked about British values of tolerance and live and let live, muscular liberalism. Over the years this has drifted into something weaker, tolerance without confidence and principles without enforcement. I'm afraid muscular liberalism is no longer enough. We must never undersell the value of liberty and freedom. They are necessary for our society to flourish. However, freedom without clarity on boundaries or clarity on what needed protecting bred a slow normalisation of separatism. It resulted in double standards and parallel norms until the country started to feel like it was running on a two-tier system with different rules for different people. That's because it is. What we need is muscular conservatism. Muscular conservatism starts from a simple truth. We do not want to throw away any of the things that are good about our society. We want to keep them, defend them, and pass them on. This means having the courage to set boundaries, being willing to enforce standards, and not being embarrassed by doing so. That is what muscular conservatism looks like in practice. We conserve. We keep the things that make this country work, the rule of law, equal citizenship, free speech, and personal responsibility. We draw limits to protect what we cherish. So you're conserving liberalism. You have defined the things that you cherish as liberalism, as legal procedures, as colourblind meritocracy, egalitarianism, not having a particular preference for a people, their culture, and their particular way of life, because you think it is applicable as a set of universal standards to anyone from anywhere that has come to live here and been given a British passport. Muscular liberalism and muscular conservatism are the same thing in the conservative conception. She said, for too long, integration has been managerial rather than moral, and let me tell you what I mean by that. It is when governments announce strategies, more consultation, and new grants for community projects, but show no willingness to say what newcomers are joining or what the civic norms actually are. Muscular conservatism is the end of that drift. We are not just a collection of individuals doing whatever we like until someone complains. We are more than that. A society is a set of shared norms, enforced fairly, and passed on deliberately. This requires clear principles, a clear diagnosis, and the nerve to act. It means refusing to be cowed into silence, and it means delivery. Relentless, practical delivery of a plan. What separates the conservatives from progressives is the speed at which revolution happens. They both agree that their identity is fundamentally liberal, is neutral, is universal, is legalistic, is pluralistic. The only thing separating them is the conservatives don't trust Labour to carry out the plan. The language that Kemi Badenoch is using here is almost identical to that which I read out in the Labour government's plan for forcing us all to get along by censoring the far-right troublemakers. Kemi Badenoch has just said, yeah, I agree with all that, but I think we just need a different plan. This is what I argued in an essay that I'll link down in the description. We are still living in the Whig Tory paradigm, where conservatism just means consolidating the gains of Whig progressive revolutions, and the Whigs believe in a set of universal liberal values that are rolled out across the society through its enlightened institutions and shepherd it along the progressive path to utopia. And the Conservatives go, yes, but please do it slowly because we're scared of change. Both agree that the people themselves that are subject to change are fundamentally fungible, that the culture and their religion and their values can be disconnected from them and transplanted onto any other person from anywhere else. The Conservatives are not conserving anything particular to the people and culture of our nation. Instead, they are conserving and consolidating the gains of the Whig progressive revolution at a speed which doesn't scare them very much. Conservatism is just communist revolution in slow motion, and the ultimate proof of this? Kemi says, today I am announcing our plans to deal with separatism, culture and integration. It starts with a new Cultural and Integration Commission. Aha! A new committee to define our identity and tell us what it is, which I am tasking with preparing an interim report by the time of our party conference in October, which I'm sure positively tens of people will attend. From that, we will create an integration and cohesion plan that sets out the culture that we want people to assimilate into. Right, so you're going to rationalistically define who we are and what society you want, and then ensure that people fit that definition. It's just more managerialism. And the ultimate proof that Kemi is consolidating the gains of the previous revolution is she says she's going to ask the Commission to work out how we can fundamentally overhaul the Equality Act so that it prioritises meritocracy and strengthens integration. It will look at how we introduce a meritocracy test so that we can ensure that anti-discrimination is not used as a mechanism to undermine meritocracy and to align incentives so integration and assimilation become the path of least resistance. The entire point of the Equality Act is divide and conquer. It is premised on a blank slate belief that if you procedurally discriminate against white people in non-white people's favour, then we will all become equal. So what Kemi is doing is she is consolidating the gains of Blair's legal revolution and then working within that framework while posturing as being completely different to the Labour Party and to the state, which is doing the exact same plan that she is promising to start at a later date. And the ultimate proof that we're just going to end up living in a national Michaela School, as I said at the start, is Kemi's promise to replace the promotion of multiculturalism in schools with a national story in civic confidence. Okay, a curriculum that, like the Labour government, says, you're English if you learn to be English. Our curriculum, she says, should tell a coherent national story, one that is inclusive of the many people who have come to Britain, but without the grievance or guilt which is corroding our cultural confidence. So, saying the Windrush came over and built the NHS. Same thing Labour are saying. We will not teach our children that all cultures are equal, okay, but you will teach them that all religions are equal, and religions and cultures are synonymous. Instead, we will teach them why Britain's civic culture matters. We will teach them British values. And Kemi has commissioned Robert Toombs to do this. If you don't remember what Robert Toombs said at the Now in England conference, this was Robert Toombs's proposed solution to the problems presented by mass migration, demographic change, multiculturalism, and sectarian voting.
I think I'd add abolish postal voting, if that can be done. Stop cousin marriage, probably. And somehow clone Catherine Burble Singh. Because if you've been to her school and you see little girls with headscarves on reciting Kipling and singing the national anthem, you think that becoming English is actually quite possible if you want to do it, and if you're encouraged to do it, and indeed required to do it. What's ridiculous?
You think you can teach somebody English?
Yes, of course you can. That's how we all learn it.
As is clear, under a Conservative or Labour government, we are going to live in a national Michaela School that enforces us to abide by the same standards as imported, hostile, tribal minorities to, as Catherine Burble Singh said at ARC in 2023, make multiculturalism work. If you want more on why I'm opposed to this strategy and my pessimism about integration happening, I'll link down in the description my new debate with Catherine Burble Singh after The Spectator censored and prevented the release of our first one. We redid the debate with Dan Wootton as a moderator, and I think we got to the heart of the matter as good as we could. I will link it down in the description. Suffice to say, I will not be living in the Michaela School. I don't care what names I get called. It's likely that I'm going to get censored by my own government using the law against social media companies and YouTube to prevent me from saying such things. But I'm just not going to allow my identity to be erased and my culture to be replaced to accommodate hostile tribal minorities who we never wanted here in the first place. Integration is not working. It will not happen. We must give up on this fallacy, and instead we must be sufficiently muscular about our own culture and our own people's possession of our own country, and those few that fit in will stay, the vast majority must leave.